Welcome to Season 1, Episode 7 of A Story Club Global Politics. This is a unique venture streaming simultaneously from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, from Dehra Dun in India, and San Francisco in the United States. We speak with people from around the world trying to understand different political cultures, issues, problems, and how we can all learn and work together while remaining grounded in our distinctive political, social, and cultural matrices. Today, my guests are Bill Martin and Michael Reckenwald, philosophers and public intellectuals. Welcome.
Hi, good to see you.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let me just give a little introduction before we start our conversation for the topic. All right, so today's topic is former Marxists for Trump. Why American leftists should vote for Trump but won't. The upcoming US election is happening in one of the strangest circumstances in history. An unprecedented social and economic lockdown in response to coronavirus, nationwide rioting and violence surrounding the Black Lives Matter and Antifa movements, and a fear of fascism and white supremacism. At the center of all this has been Donald Trump. He's like a lightning rod, electrically concentrating passions of immense hatred from one side and devotion from another. Trump's politics, however, are not traditionally Republican or Democrat, and he's attacked opponents from both parties, including his own. He has caused much confusion and shaken up the political landscape. People on both extremes seem to agree that his re-election will have tremendous historical consequences for America and everything they believe America stands for. One side says he will save it. The other side says he will destroy it forever. Well, so today I am pleased to have, as I said, Bill Martin and Michael Reckenwald to discuss these issues. They have been discussing these from very interesting angles that are not found in the mainstream discourse. So welcome again, Michael and Bill.
Thank you.
I'd like you guys to start off by telling our audience a bit about your background and in particular, how you came from being a Marxist to your support for Donald Trump, because most people will not even understand that. Let me start with Michael and then Bill. So Michael.
Okay, so it's a long story how I was a Marxist. I was a left communist, and that means that I supported basically orthodox Marxism, but also disavowed the Bolshevik Revolution and the Chinese culture, the Chinese Revolution, and basically any actually existing socialism.
Would you consider yourself a Trotskyist? Would you have considered yourself Trotskyist?
I flirted with a Trotskyist sect, and I tried to gain admission to the party, but they didn't have me. That's another story. They said my thinking was too inflected by postmodern ideas.
Right.
It's very ironic because I'm a critic of postmodern theory. Basically, I had a very big fallout with the left when I came out against social justice ideology on campuses, and I just my first response was political. That is, I saw a kind of a totalitarian ethos underlying the responses that I got from every angle of the left, from the identity politickers to just the left liberals, and then also inclusive of just about every Marxist that I knew.
Right. So you were kind of a libertarian left or libertarian Marxist.
That's right.
Yeah. Which a lot of people don't understand exists, but it does. George Orwell was a lot like that.
Yes.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, then I went into, that was the political turn, but then I started to read into theoretical issues in terms of economics, in particular Mises and other writers from the Austrian School of Economics. And I just came to reject Marxism entirely. And then I started to believe, I still believe that there really is no other way. It has to be, because it's a monopoly, because it involves monopolization, whether you want to call it the community or the state. The collectivism really, to me, means that it has to be totalitarian, because there's no other way to enforce monopolies than by a totalitarian means. You have to restrict people from engaging in free market enterprises of all sorts. There's no way. You have to stamp out basically all sort of free market individual efforts to create something that competes with the collective monopoly, for lack of a better term.
And were you did you start your anti-PC prof Twitter handle at that point?
I was a Marxist
that
when I started that handle. I was still a Marxist. It was the anti-PC NYU prof, and that was the handle. And I also called myself the deplorable NYU professor.
Right.
That was the name. The reason I chose that is because I really felt I wasn't a Trump supporter yet. I was a supporter of the people that were deemed deplorable by Hillary Clinton, the way she took these people and these sort of reprobates and threw them into a basket of deplorables. And I found that to be disgusting. And I thought the elitism was so glaring. And, so anyway, I started to recognize that, just to move into the whole Trump phenomenon, is that, that Trump represented a real shakeup for the political establishment. And what I'll call, for lack of a better term, and this sounds like right-wing talk, but it isn't really, a political liberal elite who are at all costs attempting to maintain their control and have their desiderata absolutely uncontested. And I found that Trump was actually shaking this up, and I found that very exciting. And then I actually voted for Trump in 2016, as it turns out. That was, so from being a Marxist in August to voting for Trump in November of 2016.
Right. And I mean, and your story at New York University grabbed national headlines in the United States because of the victimization that you experienced in the department and whatnot. And that's all kind of part of the story, isn't it?
Yeah, that's all out there. You can find it anywhere. I mean, I won't go too far into that because I'm tired of it, actually.
Yeah.
And I just don't like repeating that all the time. But anyway,
but it was an early part of the cancel culture, and
I was probably one of the first professors canceled, if you will, where they tried to cancel me. I actually won the battle against them because I ended up getting promoted to full professor after they did this to me.
Right.
But they still made my life untenable. I like to say that they put me in my own personal gulag. They actually moved my office from the department where I worked and put me in the Russian department. in a office, they refused to move my books. So I'm in this office in the Russian department with bare metal shelves, absolutely isolated and treated like a pariah on campus. Basically, everybody told not to speak to me, including the Russian professors. So I like to say I was shipped to sort of a Siberia within, or one of the gulags within the Russian gulag system.
Yeah. Well, let's get to Bill's story. So for people who just might not be able to wrap their heads around it, how a Marxist could end up supporting Trump. What's your personal story on that?
Well, the part where Michael started talking about when Hillary made the basket of deplorables comment, that was a very similar situation for me. So I also was not initially a Trump supporter as much as not only being very much opposed to Hillary, also in part because I thought she represented a consolidation of what I call imperialist feminism and militarist feminism that has nothing to do with the actual emancipation of women or any traditional sense of equality. But also, it seemed to me that what the basket of deplorables comment represented was not just the Democrats, but the whole left deciding that they would now, I mean, you already saw this with Bill Clinton. I mean, it was already in the works, but you really saw it come into full flowering. A left that wanted to have nothing to do with the working class actually was now recognizing that they actively hated the working class, thought that they were terrible people, and was willing to basically condemn all of them. And then when they would try this ploy where they would say, oh, well, it's really just the white workers, well, number one, that doesn't work because working people are of all colors, genders, etc. But also, okay, what if you were just talking about the white workers? Well, that's tens of millions of people who you're saying. And so they've created this incredible narrative, and it's amazing how well they've gotten by with it, especially in academia and among people who think of themselves as intellectual, who just think they're so bloody smart. I mean, and it's part of the narrative for them to puff themselves up, to think of themselves as so smart, that somehow when you go to the grocery store, even in Salina, Kansas, when you go to the grocery store, when you go anywhere, you're swimming in a sea of fascists. Everywhere you look, there's there's fascists, especially if you're looking at white people. Well, then you just know you're looking at fascists.
Yeah.
And this narrative is so, as Michael said, just disgusting.
Yeah.
And horrifying. It's just an ugly view of our fellow human beings, whatever color they are. And so that was also the turning point for me. And then the question became, just to speak to the Trump question, the question was, I, like most people, I wasn't so prescient. I didn't think Trump would win. And then I thought there was an interesting moment when Trump did win. There were a few of us, a very few, I would say, who said, okay, well, this is what we wanted. Now we've got it. Let's try to understand what it is exactly.
When you say a few of us, are you meaning like in Counterpunch? Because you used to write with Counterpunch.
Right. And the first part of my articles were more anti-Hillary, anti-Democrat. My very first article was actually saying that I wanted a Bernie Trump election, because I thought, well, that's the best outcome in terms of stretching the barriers of what is possible within our political system. And I even began to talk about that again at the beginning of this calendar year. Because obviously Bernie could have had the nomination if he had pursued it vigorously, and if whatever went on behind the scenes, and I'm sure it was some heavy stuff, told him to cut it out and told him he better submit and whatnot, which he did, to his dishonor, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
I still think that would have been a good thing, but it would also be a good thing because on every point where Trump is a very good leader for our moment, I think he's better than Bernie. He's better on the working class. He's far better on militarism. And plus, he thematizes the deep state, which Bernie won't even touch.
Yeah.
And of course, the narrative is now that if you mention any of these things, even if you just say the CIA, they're there to say, oh, conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
As if the CIA doesn't exist somehow.
Yeah.
So anyway, my background is, I was a philosophy professor for 28 years at DePaul University in Chicago. I had my own rough last 2 years where a campaign was undertaken against me. And a lot of it had to do with these articles that were attacking Hillary. And in fact, I'm so naive, I didn't realize when I came back from a year in China and we had our faculty orientation with the new grad students, and people said what they'd been working on. And I said, well, I've written all these articles about how horrible Hillary is. And I really did not realize that I was getting a lot of hate in the room right then from fellow faculty and students. And And yeah, that was the beginning of 2 years of a lot of problems. But I had already planned to retire at age 62, and so in that sense, I won the battle because I kept fighting these things, and then I just slipped away and retired. And I retired so I could be a full-time philosopher, writer, and musician, and I'm very active as a musician also.
Yeah, right. Yeah, those stories are really interesting, and the common thing with the deplorables. I mean, the way these people think, so they could just look at this panel, right? So they see three men, so they dismiss it on that. Then they see two white men, and so you guys are now the sort of only permissible people to project public hatred to. It's like, George Orwell's Hate Week. So it's like white men are the, everybody can just yell every obscenity possible and slur and whatnot. So you guys are the acceptable targets of hate just for being white men. And it's incredible, and so people might dismiss the way it is. They might dismiss this whole conversation just by looking, at the panel. And this is the sort of intellectual vacuity, they've reached to, and they've brought the country to, because now CNN will do it, New York Times will do it. I mean, it's incredible. And many of these people are white men themselves, right? So Cuomo and Anderson Cooper, and I mean,
well, they're the worst.
Yeah,
they're the worst. Yeah.
But so let me ask you, in terms of what do you think that let's say I'll say the American left, and let's say critics who share the values and the historical struggle of the left, so working people who are fighting for, social justice, even in the older sense of the word, and, economic justice, or the poor and the marginalized, that's kind of broadly what the left means. What do you think they have wrong about Donald Trump? Like with I'd like to hear, what your view is on what they have wrong about it and why they should actually support him, because that's why you support him as well. Let's start with Michael and then Bill.
Yeah, I would say that the main reason they have Trump wrong is they don't understand that there is a huge working class support for him. And this working class support isn't just white. It's actually coming from, he's going to win a record number of African-American votes. He's going to win probably, he's going to cut into the traditional percentage of Hispanics. And this is for a good reason. The good reason is that Trump is actually promoting their interests. It's not like they're deluded or under false consciousness. How is he doing so? Well, he's representing the workers against the deep state, against the vast political machinery of the elite liberal establishment, which now represents nothing but, they're pro-military. They're actually militaristic, much more militaristic than Trump. I wrote an article about this for RT a couple of days ago, which has gotten a lot of play because it's tearing the left and their support for Biden to shreds. Why? Because Obama, not only did he continue Bush's wars, he escalated them tremendously and extended them into 7 other countries. Then he bombed Yemen, Libya, increasing bombing in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he invaded Libya, and they invaded Libya. Now they say, well, we didn't technically kill Gaddafi, but they overthrew Gaddafi. We came, we saw, we killed Hillary Clinton. So these people are actually supporting the deep state military industrial complex in voting for Biden. And they would have been doing so for voting for Hillary to probably a greater extent. So to suggest that, so there's this sort of trope in the Trump camp that, we're talking about socialism on the other hand, that the Biden represents a kind of Trojan horse for socialism. There is a certain kind of socialism, that is, I call corporate socialism is what they're actually promoting. And that is to say, they're actually promoting a kind of corporate monopolization on the top with actually existing socialism for everyone else, which is a kind of reduced expectations and reduced living standards and a kind of stasis that's a static, non-competitive UBI type, universal basic income type subsistence living, which seems to me to be the worst of all worlds in terms of even socialist ideas. It's certainly not productive where you have some sort of control over the means of production. In fact, you become nothing but a hapless, basically, I like to say you're like in that movie WALL-E, you're sitting in your living room sucking out of a straw and can't even go outside. We're talking about, this is they represent a lockdown society at this point, where you have no self-determination whatsoever. Basically, this is a quarantined life they want to give us. And I mean, Trump represents the viability of people to actually undertake commerce, to create business if they wish. See, I think that nothing would be worse than stripping people of, yes, the means of production. The way to get to that is through self-determination and individual entrepreneurship, actually, and some types of people's ability to actually do things and have engagement with the economy. They represent the complete opposite of this. And then the way they manage it, I think, is something that Bill referred to, is they basically ingratiate people by teaching them that they're smarter for accepting this. They basically use a kind of paternalistic complementary system, whereas if you don't, if you accept Trump, or if you like Trump, you must be a complete idiot. You have to be uneducated. You must be poor. You must be stupid. You probably are white. And basically you're nothing but a hoi polloi, a kind of the unwashed masses. And so they try to use this distinguishing characteristic. So they're handing them cultural capital. They're handing them cultural capital in exchange for everything else. And so I think Trump is more representative of workers than the Democratic Party by any stretch of the imagination.
How about you, Bill?
One helpful thing there is that I absolutely agree with everything Michael just said. And so if you don't mind, I'll just piggyback on that just a little bit. And just to go to the last point where Michael was giving a list of all these things that are horrible about the working class, that they're stupid, etc. One interesting thing that's popping up, I'm seeing just recently, is also they're religious. And anybody who's religious is also stupid because they believe in these delusions. And it's another one of those cases where, and here I will be a little critical of Marxism and leftism, where, I mean, look, I've known Marxists and leftists who've believed in delusions that are and have a theological character to them that are far beyond what ordinary working people believe in, when they simply believe that there's some unifying force to the universe and that there's some redemptive scheme at work in history, which to me is what Christianity is about right there. And so, plus, Marxism has that in it as well. And so, I myself actually reject both of those things, but I don't think it makes a person stupid to believe in those things. But it also shows just the complete inability of the left now, and they've been shaped to be this way for many years now, but it's really come to fruition. And in a way, Trump prodded them to have to do this, where they're basically saying, we're not going to think about anything. We're not going to be self-reflective about anything. We're just so bloody smart. And that's the bottom line. And I loved what Michael said about the cultural capital that's being sold to them, in part because a very high percentage of them, that is all they're going to have at the end of this process. I have a good friend here in the middle of Kansas who has a doctorate in playing the cathedral organ, church organ. Now, he hates Christianity. He hates Trump with a passion. He's one of these people who literally posts 30 anti-Trump things a day on Facebook. So it's just pathological.
Yeah.
But he thinks that somehow after we get rid of Trump, he's going to have a good job playing organ in whatever, Salisbury Cathedral or something, when he is actually instead going to be replaced by an algorithm, like many of these so-called intellectuals, like philosophy professors for that matter. And at the end of the day, they've really sold their souls for a mess of pottage, as they say. And yeah, that's incredible. I wanted to say, Obama not only increased the surveillance state, which got vastly increased under George W. Bush, but you know, he has opened the door to what I think is going to be a brave new world society. Yeah. And this is maybe one place, just to add a little controversy here, this is one place where I would like to have a more extended conversation with Michael that we probably won't be able to have right now. But when it comes to the market, I think one of the very important things happening in the world today is I believe we're in the midst of an epochal shift in the social and economic form of capitalism, where, as crazy as it sounds, we are now in a world where there's a difference between, shall we say, the so-called mere billionaires and a group of super billionaires who are basically the ones running globalism from wherever in cyberspace, but sort of centered in Davos, Switzerland, in the World Economic Forum. And I think it's remarkable. If you go to the World Economic Forum website, they have what's called the Great Reset that they're planning for January, of course, after the election. I frankly think the election may still be going on at that point. But they'll tell you exactly what they want to do. And it's more of the same. It's replace workers with automation. Yeah. It's to extend Siberia, as in CYB area, everywhere, to control everything, the surveillance state. And it's to have regional wars, to put down local powers that seem to get out of line. It's probably to work out in the same way that the Pope, you know, centuries ago worked out the division of South America between Spain and Portugal. It's to work out some division of the world between China and the Western Bloc. And
how did Orwell say it? Oceania. There were three. I can't remember, but something like that.
And so one other thing on the Gaddafi thing and on Libya. In Libya now, thanks to Hillary Clinton and Susan Rice and the Obama-Biden administration, in Tripoli, you can purchase a black man for $400 or less.
Yeah.
And so, Black Lives Matter, but not in Africa, not in Tripoli, not in Hillary Clinton's world that Biden was fully a part of, and so. I mean, those three main things. I'll just underline them since Michael put them very. The working class, militarism, and the deep state, the surveillance state, the CIA, all of that. And you now have a left, I'll add this too, you now have a left that's okay with the CIA.
That's right.
I mean, they should have a bumper sticker. We're okay with the CIA.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
they're
like, how dare you question the FBI or CIA? That's incredible. Yeah,
and they have to be, because I mean, where all this is going, I really think is a color revolution.
Yeah.
And the pivotal moment is when the CIA goes in and gets Trump out of the White House. Yeah. And they're basically signaling, well, we're okay with that. Yeah. Which means they're okay with globalism. They're okay with super billionaires running the world.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing, as you say about I lost the point, but I will just say from my point of view, coming in, originally, from the left as well, and from a kind of third world nationalist point of view, and from global development, looking at development from Africa, Caribbean, Asia, Latin America. Forever, we've been against like the IMF, the World Bank, the FBI, the CIA, and their secret wars and their undermining, and that whole system of global development that has kept us in debt and poverty, and which the rich world has been parasitically sucking off of as well, and trying to change that whole system. And and even the working class in Europe and the United States and Canada have started to become a victim of that neoliberal ideology, which we were from a long time. When the working class areas, in the north in England, and then in the sort of northeast in the United States became, the Rust Belt, and everything was, the manufacturing jobs were exported out, and so Donald Trump was actually talking about this stuff, and I couldn't, that was amazing. And then he was the only person I've ever seen. I couldn't believe I would see an American president talk about, criticize the CIA and the FBI, and saying, America has blood on its hands, and tell Jeb Bush your brother lied. And I mean, nobody from the left was doing that. I mean,
what other president has used the terms these senseless wars?
Yeah, or military industrial complex. He's just said that
never.
A couple of weeks ago, right? And I mean, no, I can't understand how, someone who considers themselves on the left that shares that ideology, right, that I talked about, like against the whole imperial system, the whole neo-imperial system. That's what the IMF and World Bank, it just comes out of World War II, the Bretton Woods system, the old imperial powers as they were dying, they put that up there. Everyone who has been against that for the past 3-4 decades, my former professors and all this kind of stuff, I just can't understand why they are not supporting Trump. It's really amazing to me that, take away who cares if he's a Republican or a Democrat or whatever, and you have these prejudices about what Republican means or what Democrat means. And that's based on historical misunderstanding as well. But I guess this can lead me to the second question for you guys to answer is, the Democrats seem to have abandoned everything that the left really stood for. So what is it? Why is the left still latching on to the Democratic Party? There are a few people like Jimmy Dore who I love, right? Even though I don't agree with all his policy, but I love his criticism of the Democratic Party and establishment. But most of people who consider themselves fighting for for ordinary people to have a better deal in the world, the Democrats, if you objectively look at their policy, they don't seem to stand for any of that yet. It's seen as that they are the party for that. What's your reflection on that, Michael, Bill?
Well, I think first of all, what they've done is use Trump as a kind of proxy for for basically the globalists have used Trump as a proxy for directing animus to the anti-globalist position.
Yeah.
And they've done that by means of trying to frame him as a fascist, as a kind of nationalist fascist. So that they have there's a long tradition of nationalism in the United States that comes from the Republican Party mostly, that is non-interventionist, that is about the sovereignty of the nation, that is it tries to stay out of international entanglements, that has no imperialist impetus. It was trying to establish a kind of a democratic republic without without trying to extend it across the world.
Absolutely. And if I may add, I mean, in the anti-colonial movement in the third world, I mean, nationalism was the vehicle for that, right? So nationalism is being derided as some evil thing, but in every country in Latin America and Africa and Asia, everybody's a nationalist because that's the only force that has historically fought imperialism, which I guess the term we now use is globalism, but it's pretty much the same thing. And and so nationalism, if you look at whatever party, they all call themselves the national this, anywhere in the third world. And so nationalism is a good thing, but in the States, as you say, he's representing this tradition of nationalism, which I think we should welcome and embrace. But you said
it's like a post-colonialism within the U.S. in effect.
Yeah,
it's like saying, look, these are colonists of the global order, and he's trying to resist this globalism.
Because remember, the American Revolution was against the British Empire.
Yeah, and so what we have is a kind of strange island of post-colonialism here.
Yeah.
And so Trump is basically being used as a focal point in order to drive all the possible affection for, I should say, what they're doing is using him as a focal point to drive the left towards the opposite, which happens to be this Democratic-run, mass-mediated simulacrum of a kind of globalist agenda that strangely enough, involves the support of as we were saying here, of the CIA, of the FBI, actually of neocons, of the neocon project of overthrowing leaders all across the world in order to bring them in line with this new global reset, global order.
Go continue.
And Trump is you even heard Kamala Harris, if you watched the debate last night, she called it isolationism, as if it's this evil. Isolationism is this evil now. He's an isolationist. Well, I find that to be good, because isolationism means we're not engaging in overseas adventures in order to extend, in effect, a kind of empire.
That's right.
So it's strange. He's anti-imperialist,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they have managed to call him Hitler too, in effect, whereas he has none of the expansionist objectives of a kind of Nazism that Nazism had, Nazism wasn't just about the German state; it was about expanding the German state and overtaking more and more territory. Obviously, I mean, Hitler annexed Poland. He attempted to take over various states. So, it's just amazing how they have totally butchered history. They have conflated all kinds of nationalism with Nazism, in effect, or fascist, other forms of fascism.
That's right.
And they've managed to direct all the animus that people have towards what they're doing onto Trump.
That's right. Projection. I want to add to what you're saying and get Bill in on this, because it's like the neocons are this slippery bunch, because they did start off with the Democrats, then they went with Bush, and now they're like back with the Democrats.
Right.
And they started off as Trotskyists, as I'm sure you know. So the Democrats are the party of the neocon, and Thomas Piketty has also spoken about these center left parties in whether it be the United States or Europe have become the party of the Brahmins, meaning the educated classes. So it's kind of this unholy alliance of the university elite, university educated elite, and the neocons, and that seems to define the left, and these left parties. You want to comment on that, Bill?
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad isolationism was brought up by Michael. I agree with that entirely as well. I mean, what about a time in the world, and maybe not for all time, there's nothing for all time in our transient empirical world, but where we all just mind our own bloody business for a while.
Yeah.
And get our own houses in order, and everybody else can do the same. So I think isolationism is fine from that standpoint. Also from the standpoint of self-sufficiency. And for example, I'll make one remark up here too. One of the things, even my friends who will sort of agree with me, I think they just want to placate me a little bit on some of this stuff about Trump. Well, they'll say, but the environment, the climate change. And one thing I think is very interesting is, the US is now energy sufficient.
Yeah.
That is a huge climate change issue. I wish Trump actually would talk about that more. There's a lot of energy in this world that's used just moving energy around all around the world.
Correct.
Also, these endless wars are some of the biggest environmental disasters ever, which the Democrats have no problem just promoting, and they'll promote even. And if Biden somehow gets in, which I think unfortunately that he has a good chance, it'll happen through a color revolution. But if he gets in, the US will be at war with Syria, be back in Syria, confronting Russia and Syria, I don't know, April, May next year. And these things are not environmentally neutral or by any means, on the contrary. But what you were saying at the end, these people who, they're so puffed up. That's such a great biblical expression from Paul, actually.
Right.
They're just very puffed up, and they think they're going to be the winners in all of this. And to go back to something Michael said about universal basic income as well. I mean, initially I thought, well, that sounds pretty good. I thought Yang was saying some good stuff. He was sidelined very quickly, of course. But having read this book that I would recommend very highly by Joel Kotkin called The Coming of Neo-Feudalism.
Right.
He talks about universal basic income. It's almost like a kind of methadone program, you might say. It's like a maintenance program to keep these, the heroin addicts going until you can just get rid of them altogether, or until they just die. And you can move on to converting what remains of the working class to basically serfdom, and then have an immigrant, untouchable class to do the really, crap jobs. The total crap jobs. And then everybody else is going to be part of the technocracy. But how many of those people do you really need? Right now, you quote unquote need a lot of lawyers, et cetera, to run this whole thing. But when they really integrate the whole globalist framework, and this is what they want. I mean, this is the epochal shift that you now have. It's almost like a Robert Heinlein novel, or even Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, capital, where it's really just a handful of people who are the top people in everything, which is a bizarre notion. And, the top composer, the top steel man, like the top inventor, like that's really a thing. But no, the top tech and finance super billionaires is really a thing. And they own a lot of the world. And because they own it, now they want to have a governance structure that controls more of it. But how many lawyers do they really need? So how many philosophy professors, how many literature professors do they really need? This new working class, this new serf class isn't going to be studying literature or philosophy. So they're not going to need many people for that. And the rest of them can do it on the internet. And then the really elite can do it at their boutique universities like Harvard and Princeton, et cetera. And so they think, all these people think they're going to, and that's what's so ugly about it. They think they're going to be the winners in all this. And so they hate Trump for basically wrecking their good time, wrecking their party. And they construct a narrative. And here's how bad the narrative is. I mean, I think Michael hit one side of it when they call him Hitler. And so, it's so ridiculous. It's just laughable. It's not only laughable, it's anti-Semitic. Okay. It's anti-Semitic to call Trump Hitler, because what do you think Hitler was? Like what's your notion of Hitler, if you can say that about Trump? But here's another way to come at it from the flip side. In any ordinary world, a major so-called political party puts forward Joe Biden.
Yeah.
I mean, what the, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like in any normal world, you would look at that and say, what? You know,
Yeah.
like,
I mean,
and yet,
that's
and
why.
yet,
Yeah,
and yet
that's one of
they're
the reasons why I think we all thought. I think the three of us probably thought so that Bernie was a shoo-in. I mean, he had all the momentum behind him. Joe Biden was a mess. He can't string together a sentence, but they've propped him up like, you know, it's
well, and in what world where people are saying things like, well, I view everything in terms of race, which
Yeah.
is what a lot of my white philosophy colleagues are saying now. In what world then would you say the guy who talks about corn pop was a bad dude, who hung out with segregationists most of his career, who's had 50 years in government to do something and hasn't done a damn thing,
that's right.
except work for credit card companies?
Mm.
In what world would you say, yes, race is the central question in our society? Well, it's certainly a very important question. I'm not saying anything other than that. But in what world would you say, well, let's have this guy Joe Biden run that, and
It's
let's have Kamala Harris, since he's a placeholder. Let's have Kamala Harris, who fully supported mass incarceration.
That's right.
Biden bragged, I wrote the damn bill.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris is a prosecutor specialized in putting Black people in jail in California. California, Joel Kotkin says California is the representation of where things are heading, which is horrifying.
And she put them in jail for drugs, and then she laughed about doing, you know, smoking weed
doing
on
drugs herself
in the morning.
Yeah, and early on also, I mean, and whatever, you know, but early on, she herself did not say she was Black. She said she was Indian.
That's right.
And then she changed that purely out of opportunism. So this is how much Black Lives Matter. Well, if it's opportunistic for me as a politician, then I'll say I'm Black. And if
like
it's
Rachel Dolezal and Sean King,
And what did Biden say a year ago? Do you remember this? What he said was the civil rights issue of our time.
LGBT.
Not even just that.
Transgender, right.
But then he saw the light in the summer of love. Black Lives Matter, you know, and so
I want to ask you guys, since I don't want to leave this out of the conversation, because there's a lot of talk, and from the outside, because I'm not there in the United States, but I'm looking at the media, I'm reading things. What's your take on the talk that America is very close to civil war? I know you wrote something on it for RT, Michael, recently. But is this a real threat? Is it magnified by the media? Because there are some people who I've spoken to, and they say, no, that's an exaggeration. It's really not everywhere. It's in certain cities, and but I don't know. It looks really, this is unprecedented, and I don't know how to gauge it really. But Michael, you wrote something on it, so why don't you start?
Yeah, people will argue against that idea by saying, this bunch of blue-haired, basement-dwelling Antifa characters have, and Black Lives Matter people, they don't have the arms or the efficacy or the numbers to carry this out. Well, my suggestion is they're not alone. They're not carrying it out. They're actually supported by huge billionaire class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they are actually funded, and they're obviously they're given a media backing as well. The whole media establishment has basically exonerated them.
Yeah.
In their rampages of late. So we have a kind of this strange configuration on the left, which consists of, as I put it in that article, you have the media, the entire media establishment, you have the Democratic Party, you have the deep state, and you have Black Lives Matter and Antifa.
Yeah.
And this is the left now. This is what they consist of. This is the resistance. They've refashioned the left along this new lines of the resistance.
Yeah.
And you have the neocons. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the left. That's what
let me just add something here, and I'd like you to comment on.
Yeah.
Which is there's a link that I'm amazed people haven't made more of, but Antifa, many Antifa people were trained with the Al-Nusra Front and the Kurdish separatists in Syria, and they were actually being trained militarily. There's pictures of them holding up their Antifa flag and whatnot. So there are these real links with Antifa and the CIA and FBI.
Yes. Yeah. Because after all, who funded who created ISIS in the first place?
Yeah.
I mean, the arms were actually provided by the Obama administration. They
right.
provided, so they had in Syria, you had a CIA-backed contingent fighting against another contingent that was backed also by the US.
Yeah.
So they had two factions that they created and actually were fighting against each other. They were funding the enemy of the enemy. I mean, it's
That's
incredible.
right.
So
the left used to be against that stuff. Now they're for it. It's
right,
amazing.
they're for it. So if it were just Antifa and Black Lives Matter versus everyone else, I would say, yeah, that's not going to be a revolution. It's going to be a riotous episode that they could put down. But you got to remember that that's not the full configuration here. The full
did you add the media into that coalition? Because
yes,
definitely.
I said the media. Yeah, you have the media, which is creating an alternate universe of sorts. Okay,
that's right.
It's
because they will be cheering, and they have been cheering Antifa on. They have been cheering the rioters on, the looters on,
cheering them on and exonerating them at the same time. You know, standing in front of a camera saying mostly peaceful protest with a building burning right behind them.
That's
I mean,
right.
This is gaslighting to the extreme.
Yeah.
They have tried to gaslight, create an alternate world, an alternate reality, and pass it off as the real. Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of some postmodern theory,
Yeah,
they have produced a simulacrum. You know, the interesting thing is here, a lot of the things that the left has critiqued is actually what they're undertaking now.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So I read Marcuse, for example, in his essay against Repressive Tolerance, and the idea of silencing the dominant position because it's repressive in itself. They are the dominant position, silencing all other positions now.
Yeah.
So you have a very odd configuration here, and the Civil War will be the American resistance to this configuration, if there is one.
Yeah.
You know, because you have, there'll be there's a possibility of it, so they'll be vilified, of course.
Yeah.
And if it comes to a civil war, they'll lose because they'll be up against all these parties at once.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, that's you're coming from New York, which is a very important part of this whole tumult going on. And now let's hear the view from Kansas. That would be really interesting as well, Bill.
Well, Michael, in what you just said, I lost track of who is they? Who is they who will lose?
The American resistance, the real resistance to this configuration, comprised of the leftist street soldiers, the media, the deep state, the neocons, and the Democratic Party. That's the left.
And do you think the real resistance, which I take it you and I are a part of, that we'll win or we'll lose?
I'm afraid we would lose that.
Yeah. Because
we won't have the whole ideological apparatus supporting it. We'd be vilified as retrenchant, regressive neo-Nazis, and on and on and on. So, and also they have the arms. I mean, I don't know, but I've heard rumors that there are even top military brass prepared to remove Trump from the White House if necessary. So
right. I think that's the color revolution.
Yeah.
What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a color revolution, and the non-colored are going to lose, as it were. They will try to paint it all as a white supremacist resistance, whereas it's a resistance against these global hegemons,
Yeah.
So they have the narrative power to create this simulacrum that we will then would have to resist in every way possible, militarily, intellectually, media representation wise, and so on and so forth. And that's a losing battle, because they've got all the sectors locked down.
Yeah.
So Bill, well,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I'll say unfortunately, I agree with that, all of that, pretty much.
Right.
And just to take the last thing of the sectors locked down, I mean, I think the whole aim of the globalist agenda is to make sure they get locked down again after this disruption that Trump has caused for them,
Yeah.
which they hate. And in fact, I've used these terms: clarification, which more or less means exposure, exposing what the globalists are up to, and disruption. But the largest part of the disruption is the exposure.
Yeah.
They just don't want to be exposed. But on the other hand, like Michael said, they control all these sectors where once they get full control again, they will lock that down like they never have before, and such that nothing like this can happen again, including even through things like packing the Supreme Court, making Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico into states, letting everybody vote, 7 times if they receive the form in the mail, which I don't know. I've received the form. I've received these invitations to vote, so to speak, like 20 times now. Every other day they show up in the mail. And, I do like this. On Tucker Carlson, there was this fella. He was at Duke. Do you remember the name? And he left Duke, or he was pushed out of Duke. And he talked about the color revolution. And he talked about the guy who had written the manual for the color revolution, who was also, what's his name again? Do you remember? I'll have to look it up. But this guy wrote the manual, and he was all part of the impeachment proceedings and all of that.
Right.
And he just lays out the stages for the color revolution, and you see them unfolding right now. You prepare the stage for everybody to be supposedly confused about the election.
Yeah.
You do all this stuff with the mail-in voting. And then you condemn Trump because he says something about it. Well, that just shows he's a would-be dictator who wants to be even more of a dictator. Then on election day, you just say, "Oh, gee, I really don't know who won, but I know that Trump is wanting to be a supreme dictator, so it must be that he's manipulated things, and that's why it looks like it's confusing." And then then you bring all the people who've been rioting all summer, who've had their practice riots, to literally the White House. They can bang down the gates, they can set things on fire and call it peaceful protest and all of that. And you set the stage anyway for what could be a civil war. I think it will be a civil war if the apparatus Michael talked about decides that, well, that's what we have to have. Right. And they will cause things, because I think actually in a certain sense, in the way, that we used to talk as Marxists, the objective conditions are not actually there for civil war, but the subjective conditions that are stirred up by this apparatus can be stirred up into that point. It is interesting. There was a point where Antifa made some statement about, okay, well, we've done things in the cities. Now we're going to go to the countryside. And some friends of mine posted this meme, and it's definitely true in Salina, Kansas. Yeah. That you have to realize there are people who will sit in trees for 6 or 7 hours for the opportunity to shoot at something.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it would go so well in Salina, Kansas, if Antifa tried to do that here. I mean, I'm probably the only person on my block who doesn't have at least one gun in the house, and my guess is there's probably an average of 5 guns in every house surrounding me. But then again, I've thought about reviving, and I know, Michael, you'll love this, the Maoist idea of surrounding the cities from the countryside. Mm-hmm. But I just don't see it working that way because of all these elements of the apparatus that the super billionaires control.
That's
Yeah.
right. And they will shut down on social media, and they're already
That's right.
beginning to. They're purging all resistance to this on social media. So there'll be no way for these people to connect with each other.
That's
Facebook is locking it down. They brought in their new oversight board on October 1st. This oversight board has deep ties. 90% of them are funded by Soros's Open Society Foundations.
Yeah.
And these people are already isolating and cutting out all the kinds of resistance to this, the real resistance, I would call it.
And let me, we're coming close to the end, and so we need to wrap up, unfortunately. But we have a global audience here, in India, in the Caribbean, and elsewhere as well. What would you say the importance of these elections are to the world, to the rest of the world? Because it's obviously not just an American thing. So if Trump gets in and he's not allowed to start to govern, or if he loses, or what's at stake here for the rest of the world? Do you see, Michael, and then Bill?
Yeah, I'd say, where the U.S. goes, I'm afraid the world's going to follow.
Yeah.
If it tumbles, and I mean here that democracy will be totally wiped out.
Yeah.
If democracy here is overthrown through this, concatenation of events, then you'll see the same thing happening everywhere. This will be rolled out all across the planet, and where they, if the U.S.'s democratic self-determination is undermined, you're going to see the same effects across the globe. Because they'll see if they can pull it off here, they can pull it off anywhere.
That's right.
This is
we're seeing with coronavirus, like the attacks on civil liberties and everything. So if America can restrict free speech and freedom of movement and association, then anybody can do it.
Anybody can do it. And you see that it's exaggerated in other places like parts of Australia. I mean, unbelievable. That's the lockdown society that they would impose globally. So we're the final stronghold of democratic self-determination, and I know that has never been perfect. But it's going to be utterly overthrown if this happens, I think. And so this would be the rollout of this new reset globalism, because this is the center of economics. We're still number one in terms of the United States is still economic superpower despite China's rise. I think you're going to see basically implementation of CCP type politics everywhere. So I think China's been the model for quite a while. And this is why they can't stand Trump's vilification of China. So basically you're going to see the social credit scoring, you're going to see the surveillance rolled out to extents never known before with 5G and so on and so forth. So yeah, where the U.S. goes, I'm afraid, and I don't mean to sound exceptionalist here, but this has been a beacon of possibility, to put it in a minimalistic sense.
Yeah, definitely. And Bill, how about you? What's your view?
Well, again, I agree with all that. So let me just say a couple sort of structural things here. I think the rise of China. So, I mean, if you look at this rise of globalism as especially taking place around the Bill Clinton administration, the early 90s, and the end of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, it's very interesting how then this whole thing is bookended by that bloc dissolving and then the rise of China at this end of things. And I think it's given us a world, and certainly a United States, where things are at a crossroads. And I'll say this one other thing about the left. I think the left has declined because it's hung on to outworn ideas, some of which weren't right to begin with, but others maybe were right at some point, but they're way off now. They are unable to think for one reason that everybody is unable to think these days, which is the internet and social media and acceleration, acceleration of epistemological ratios, as Marshall McLuhan put it. They hate philosophy now, and I believe that philosophy has a very important role to play in our world today, including to get us to look at big pictures and structures. And the problem with us being at the crossroads is that the globalists, I mean, this goes to Michael's point about controlling every sector of the apparatus. They have their road well set out. And then a bump in the road occurred that they never thought would happen, which is Trump.
Yeah.
But on the other side, we don't really have our road sorted out very well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is we have to talk about things, very basic philosophical things like, well, what would be a good society?
Mm-hmm. What
would be a good society according, for example, to the founders of this American Republic? And what would we do with that today? In what sense would we make of that today? People who talk about the promise of America, like F.H. Buckley, and who also talk about the idea of a Republican Workers' Party, which I think is very important because we need to talk about, well, what is it we would really need if we're not going to talk about, well, we hope at the last minute QAnon or whatever will step in and save us. Well, that might happen. But on the other hand, nothing will save us. As to use Michael's terms, nothing will help us with self-determination unless we have the selves in their masses who say, we don't want the globalist road. We want something else, and we're willing to put ourselves out there in our practice and in our thoughts to make that happen.
Yeah.
And so I think we really need to work on defining the alternative beyond the disruption and the exposure of what the bad road is that we don't want to get on. But I'm afraid it's going to be very, 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 very difficult. And even if Trump remains in, which of course I absolutely hope he does, that division in society between these two roads, it's going to keep going because it's structural.
Yeah.
And also the super billionaires, they have too much at stake. They literally own a lot of the world. They're not going to just say, no ruling class has ever said, oh, well, we had our day or whatever, or it didn't work or whatever. They fight tenaciously. And so if we don't have the ways to fight tenaciously, it's going to be very hard. So otherwise, I completely agree with what Michael said. The way the U.S. goes is the way the world's going to go because it's the U.S. and China. Yeah. And China, and I've lived in China. I've lived for a year in China. Mm-hmm. I love China. I loved living in China. But, like, for example, as far as surveillance, you're being surveilled. Yeah. Everybody there knows they're being surveilled. They're very aware of being surveilled. Yeah. And so there's no question. There's not any moment where you say, well, I guess I could speak freely on these issues right now. And, so everybody's already just used to that. Mm-hmm. But I agree. That's where things are going to go. And so we'll have a U.S. China world where the Chinese model is basically what it's going to be.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to close off our discussion now. I mean, we just scratched the tip of so many fascinating discussions that we could have gone on for hours about. But for people who want to find out, about your work and what you're doing now, maybe, and then also, whatever archives you have, what's the best place to find you, Michael?
Yes, it's very simple. michaelreckenwald.com. That's RECTENWALD, one word, michaelreckenwald.com. You can find my book and other books. Beyond Woke is my last one. I have a new one coming out called Thought Criminal, which is about the resistance to this.
That's a novel, right?
That's a novel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So, good. Excellent. And Bill, if people want to find out about you and what you're doing.
I really don't want people to find out about me right now. When I posted something recently on Facebook about a month ago about the CIA and basically putting it in the face of the left that you're now in bed with the CIA and you seem okay with that, and a lot of people just responded, "Yeah, we're okay with it." And this led to like a 343 comment, storm
Yeah.
against me. I decided to just hole up for a while. I'm
Yeah.
finishing a book called The Trump Clarification, but I've been saying I've been finishing it for a year.
Right.
Stuff keeps happening. I don't think November 3rd is the deadline anymore.
Yeah.
But on the
I
other
think you have to do
hand,
volume 1. You just have to title it volume 1.
yeah, I think on the other hand, it's either going to be an autopsy or something to rally the troops to keep going. And I'm trying to think of how to shape it that way. But at some point when I put this out, I'll announce it widely.
Yeah, I'm very anxious for that book, Bill. I've been really hoping to see it, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Me too. And I'm excited about your novel, by the way.
Thank you.
Is this your first novel?
It's my first novel, but
yeah, great.
I've written fiction before, but this is my first novel. It's quite an adventure to write a novel.
And you've also written poetry before too.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for this enlightening and thought-provoking conversation. It's been a pleasure and honor having you on the program.
Thank you so much.
Right. Well, that's it for this week's episode of A Story Club Global Politics. We were talking with our guests, Michael Reckenwald and Bill Martin. Our topic was former Marxists for Trump, why American leftists should vote for Trump but won't. Thank you to our audience as well, that's you, for listening and watching. We hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to your feedback. Please join us again next week. And in the meanwhile, like, share, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. Thanks again, and see you next week.